Mr. Jonathan Coleman is a New York Times best-selling author. He has written a long list of books, but there's one in particular we'll be talking about today. Long Way to Go, Black and White in America was published in 1997 and has been called a classic. He has traveled across the country, taken part in symposiums that center on race, served as an advisor to President Clinton's initiative on race, and he wrote speeches for the NAACP during the late Julian Bond's tenure as chairman. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Coleman. How are you?
It's very nice to see you again. A lot of years have passed between, but I'm
You got that right. It has certainly been a long time, and I asked you to join us for this very important conversation because when I first moved to Milwaukee, which was probably late September of 1996, I interviewed you about this book, and it's just amazing to me that, you know, in looking at how everything is currently in our society and then looking back over your research that was done 30 years ago, I'm just interested in knowing, how did you come up with Milwaukee all those years ago?
Well, there were a variety of reasons. I felt that it was important that I found one place that could be a microcosm, convincingly a microcosm, so that if you were in Seattle or Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, Des Moines, you would read this book and at least be able to recognize some, if not most, of what was being discussed among the people who lived in that place, whether they were issues related to housing, to schools, to various things going on in their community. I first thought about Chicago, but around that time, two very significant books came out that were set in Chicago. One was Alex Kotlowitz's book, There Are No Children Here. And the other was Nicholas Lemon's book, The Promised Land, about the Great Migration.
Okay.
The things that drew me to Milwaukee, there were a number of things going on at the time, which I mentioned early in the book, because a lot of people would wonder, why Milwaukee? You had an alderman, Michael McGee, who had an office in City Hall, but had actually reformed the Black Panthers into a group called the Black Panther Militia, basically threatening the city of Milwaukee if certain demands weren't met. That's pretty interesting coming from an alderman with a paid position in City Hall. He was featured on 60 Minutes. You saw that. Representative Polly Williams was making her first movements toward instituting school choice and charter schools. That was interesting. There was a push for an Afrocentric curriculum in certain schools, that certain schools in Milwaukee, like Victor Berger, would be turned over to an Afrocentric curriculum. Another educational idea that was very interesting. Sadly, Milwaukee was one of a group of 4 or 5 cities considered not only segregated, but hyper-segregated. It was a city, like many northern cities, that African Americans had come from the South, migrated north to find very good jobs, very good manufacturing jobs. Those jobs were slowly becoming service jobs and no longer really jobs that you could support a family with. So there were all those factors, and I thought Milwaukee would be a manageably sized city for me to do the story in. And I had some personal biases in that I was a longtime Milwaukee Braves fan, and I'd followed the Braves in the 50s, but I'd never been to Milwaukee. So I really was sort of enamored of the idea of coming to Milwaukee, partly for that reason, so that when I wasn't working, I could go out and see some games at County Stadium. I mean, it can't all be work, Andrea. But I also had a feeling that because of the television show, name's escaping me right now, with the Fonz, help me with that.
Happy Days.
I mentioned it in the book.
Yeah, and Laverne and Shirley.
Right, Laverne and Shirley. that there would be a sort of sense. I wasn't sure. I had to come out and look. I didn't decide on Milwaukee until I was there for a while. That it would come across and would seem to other people as a quintessentially American place. That was important to me. That it would feel like a quintessentially American place. I liked the fact that there were a lot of different ethnic groups in Milwaukee as well. So those were I would say the main factors that brought me there. But I wouldn't have stayed in Milwaukee unless I stayed around long enough to actually feel, yes, this is the place that will resonate to readers elsewhere. That's the gamble you take when you write about a place and argue or hope that people will see it as a microcosm.
Yeah. So how long did you stay here to complete your research?
I was there the entire summer of 1991, and then I would come back usually every month for a week for quite a long time.
Yeah. Well, like I said early on, I really felt this connection or this reason to contact you. I've always remembered this book because I was so new to the city, and it really almost gave me an education on all of the things that, existed, the people who were moving and shaking things, people who were unhappy with the way things were. And I kind of picked this out of my library, and I thought, wow, he autographed this September 16, 1997. And just thumbing back through this, it just reminded me, you talk to so many amazing people who have and continue to make a difference here in the city. Former MPS Superintendent Dr. Howard Fuller. You talked to the late Dr. James Cameron, who was the founder of the America's Black Holocaust Museum. You met the late Vel Phillips. Your storylines also kind of dealt with a white woman who insisted that she earned her racism, another woman who became painfully aware of the privileges that she had because of her race, and then also following a black family that was determined that gangs would not force them out of their neighborhood. So with the title, Long Way to Go, Black and White in America, we fast forward all these years, and I'm just interested in knowing, Mr. Coleman, do you think we still have a long way to go, or what strides have we made in your opinion?
Well, let me say this. On the surface, when the book came out, I think many people probably saw it as a more negative title than it actually was or was meant to be. Mm-hmm. Had there been more room, this would not have been a good marketing decision, but had there been more room, the title of the book would have been, We as a Country Have Made Great Progress, but There Is Still a Long Way to Go. One of the things that people overlooked a bit in reading the book is the questions I had were basically these. I was invested in the idea that the civil rights movement had moved us forward. And so I didn't want to think, and this is really naive, I didn't want to believe that the issues of race weren't resolved. Well, they were far from being resolved.
Right.
It's the same thing, if I might add, in 2008, I was asked over and over and over again, now that Barack Obama has been elected president, do you feel that we are going to now move into a post-racial age? I said, are you kidding me? I said, no, just the opposite. I said, there will be a large segment of the population, of the white population, that will feel, all right, you've got a black president. What more do you want? And then there would be that they'd reached the limit of what they felt they could give as voters. So the key to this book was the question, not only how far has the country come, and this was looking at it in the 90s, how far has the country come since the end of the civil rights movement, but more importantly, how far does the country want to go? And that remains, to more so than ever, the question that nobody can answer.
Right.
We don't know how far people feel is enough.
That's it. Long way to go. And I can't tell you how amazing it is to be able to reconnect with you and talk about this book and really see that you still have the same passion that you had 30 years ago when you were here in Milwaukee doing your research. And I really would recommend this book to anyone who has not had a chance to pick it up, because there's so much history just from you doing your research. A lot of the people that you spoke with are no longer with us, and there's just a lot between these two covers. So thank you so very much for your time, and keep on keeping on, Mr. Coleman.
Andrea, thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Mr. Jonathan Coleman is the author of the book Long Way to Go, and Black and White in America, and all of Mr. Coleman's research and interviews related to Long Way to Go can be found at the Golda Meir Library at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.